Welcome to Between Sessions, part of the Grapevine Wellness Show. I'm Jolyn Armstrong, and this is something a little different from what you may be used to if you've been with us for our interview episodes. Between Sessions is where I get to talk to you directly. No guest, no conversation, just me sharing what I'd share with you in session. The things that I say in this room, the frameworks that I use, the reframes that actually move the needle for people here between sessions for anyone who needs to hear it. I want to start this series with something that has been coming up constantly in my work lately, and I mean constantly. It's something I see underneath a lot of what people bring into sessions. Sometimes they name it directly, sometimes very, very obvious what's going on, and sometimes it's hiding underneath anxiety or relationship tension or just this kind of pervasive feeling that something is really wrong, but that they can't quite put their finger on, right? And that thing that keeps coming up is disillusionment, right? I want to talk about what it actually does to us, to our nervous system, to our relationship, to our sense of who we are, because I don't think we talk about it honestly enough, actually. We pathologize symptoms without naming the source. So that's what we're going to do today. All right. Let's start with the definition because, again, like I said, I think the word itself gets underestimated and not clearly defined in our society. Disillusionment is what happens when reality fails to match the picture that we carried in our minds, right? That's it at its core. We had a belief about a person, an institution, a path, a system, a country, and reality contradicted that belief in a way that we couldn't explain away or recover from. The illusion is gone. And what's left in its place is something raw and disorienting, uncomfortable. Here's what I want you to notice though about that definition, okay? An illusion is gone, which means we're actually closer to truth than we were before. Disillusionment, painful as it is a movement toward reality. It doesn't make it hurt any less. Truly, I know that. In fact, sometimes it makes it hurt more because we don't just lose belief, we lose the version of the world where that belief was true, and that world felt safer, right? The reason disillusionment is so hard has everything to do, though, with how our nervous systems are wired. So I want to focus on that for a little bit. Our nervous systems are fundamentally prediction machines, right? I know that might sound a little clinical, whatever, but stay with me because it's one of the most useful things to understand about yourself, and especially in this setting, in this situation. Your brain is constantly, and I mean constantly, without pause, without rest, without fail, building a model of how the world works, right? It takes in information, it updates the model, and then it uses that model to predict what comes next. This is how we can, drive to or from work and get there, park our car and realize, "Oh, I didn't even pay attention to the road, right? I don't know how I made the turns that I made, whatever, right? This is how you know without looking roughly where things are in your kitchen. You're like, yep, that's where it is. Your brain has built a really reliable model and it runs on that model to conserve energy. Also just is a comfortable place to be, right? Now, what happens when something in that model is fundamentally wrong? We find out, hold on a minute, that what I thought isn't the case, right? The brain experiences that as a threat, not metaphorically, neurologically, right? When our predictions fail, especially in a significant way, the threat response activates. The amygdala, which is your brain's kind of alarm system, starts to fire. Cortisol and adrenaline move through the body, the heart rate increases, muscles prepare for action. Your body is doing exactly what it's designed to do, mobilizing you to respond to danger, because that's what it sees as danger, right? The problem is the danger here isn't a predator. There's no tiger in the room. A belief system is collapsing. There's no physical action that resolves that. Our nervous systems, though, respond exactly as if there is that threat, right? The activation, that threat response, has nowhere to go. And when threat responses have nowhere to go, they stay in the body. They get stuck. They show up as anxiety, as hypervigilance, as irritability, sometimes as numbness, right? Or that low grade sense of dread that you can't shake, even on a good day. This is why disillusionment doesn't feel like an intellectual event. It doesn't feel like simply updating our opinions. It feels like the floor dropped out, right? Because neurologically, something very close to that is actually happening. It's why it's so intense. I want to walk through some of the places where this shows up, because I think when we only talk about something like disillusionment in one context, people who are experiencing it in a different area of life don't really recognize themselves in the conversation. So let me name a few places or a few ways that this might show up for us. The first one I want to talk about is faith and spiritual community, because for many people, this is the deepest organizing structure of our lives. It answers the biggest questions, right? Why are we here? What happens when we die? How should we live? What is what is our relationship to something larger than ourselves? When that structure fractures through, that kind of common term, a faith crisis or a crisis of belief. I hate that term, but through experiencing, that could cause this fracture, experiencing harm within a faith community, actual real harm, through watching a religious institution behave in ways that contradict everything that it claims to stand for. The disillusionment in this case is profound, right? It isn't just losing a set of beliefs. It's losing a community, an identity, a framework for meaning, and often a relationship with something that you understood to be sacred. The nervous system responds to that kind of a loss in enormous ways. It's huge, and it's almost always underestimated by the people going through it and by the people around them. Okay. Another place, excuse me, another place that this shows up is one that carries a particular kind of shame, actually, especially in our society. This area is career and vocation, right? We live in a culture that tells us that our work should be our passion. So when someone spends years, sometimes decades, working towards a career only to find that the reality doesn't match what they believed it to be, the disillusionment is layered with self-judgment, right? I should have known. I wasted years. What does this say about me? I see this in people who went into helping professions quite a little bit, teachers, nurses, social workers, who genuinely believed in what they're doing and found themselves ground down by systems that didn't share their values, actually. I see it in people who followed a passion into a field and discovered that turning a passion into work changes the relationship with that passion in ways that nobody warned them about. I see it in people who did everything right, right? They got the degree, they built the career, and then looked up one day and realized that what they built really actually didn't feel like theirs at all. The grief in that is real, and it often doesn't get named as grief because nothing died, right? You can't grieve something if it didn't die, except something did die. And by the way, you can grieve a lot of things that don't die too. um, but in this case, something did die. The future that they believed in died, the life that they believed in. Then there's a broader category that I want to name, and that's disillusionment with institutions and systems, right? Healthcare, education, the legal system, financial systems, government, all of those institutions and systems, right? Most of us grew up with some fundamental belief that these systems, however imperfect, were really oriented toward good, that people in positions of responsibility were at some basic level trying to do the right thing, right? When that belief erodes through either personal experience or through watching others harmed by the system that was supposed to protect them, through sustained exposure to evidence that the gap between, what these institutions claim and what they actually do is pretty vast, something gets destabilized. And here's what I want you to hear in that, okay? That destabilization is a rational response to real information. This isn't catastrophizing. It's not an anxiety disorder, okay? This is a nervous system responding accurately to the recognition that the world is less safe and less just than we were taught to believe. The problem isn't the recognition. The problem lies with what we do with it and what happens to us when we have nowhere to put that response. Okay, which brings us to where many of us are right now, right? We notice it in our society. This year marks the 250th anniversary of the United States. And I want to acknowledge that directly because it feels important. And because I think for a lot of people, it lands with complicated feelings that they're just not quite sure what to do with, right? There was a time, and many of us lived in it, I know I did, when national pride felt simpler, when the 4th of July felt uncomplicated. I know I attended fireworks every single 4th of July with my family in Colorado, right? The story of this country, however incomplete, felt like something that you could hold on to and feel genuinely moved by. For a lot of people, that simplicity is gone, and the loss of it is, and I want to say this clearly, okay? The loss of it is a form of disillusionment, a real one, with all the nervous system consequences that I just described. I'm not here to tell you what to think about your country politically, okay? It's genuinely not what this is about. What I am here to tell you, as someone who sits with people's pain for a living, is that the collective anxiety and hypervigilance, the exhaustion, the way political conversations rupture relationships, the low-grade dread that many people carry, this is disillusionment at scale, okay? This is millions of nervous systems in a chronic threat response with nowhere to put that activation. And the research on this is clear, okay? I want to say this as clear as the research does. Humans need to belong to something larger than themselves, not as a luxury, as a psychological necessity. Kind of tribal belonging, collective identity, shared narratives. These aren't just nice to have. They're fundamental to how we regulate, how we find meaning, and how we sustain hope. When that's fractured or absent, we don't just feel sad about it. That's not it, right? We become dysregulated. Our relationships suffer. Our capacity for joy narrows. Our tolerance for difference shrinks, right? So the question isn't whether to feel disillusioned. That feeling's honest. The question is, what do we do with it? And whether there's a way to hold both the disappointment and something worth believing in at the same time. I think there is, right? There certainly is in my life. It shows up all the time. Okay. So here's the reframe that I want to offer, and it comes directly from what I've seen work in sessions. Okay. The antidote to disillusionment is not re-illusionment, right? It's not going back to a simpler, less informed version of belief. You can't unknow what you know, and trying to does its own kind of psychological harm. The antidote is what I would call clear-eyed commitment, the ability to see something honestly, including its failures and contradictions, and choose to invest in it anyway. We do this in relationships all the time, at least in healthy ones, right? A long kind of successful marriage isn't sustained by the belief that your partner's perfect. It's sustained by knowing them fully, their flaws, their wounds, their limitations, and choosing them anyway. Choosing to believe in the potential of what you're building together, even when the present is really hard, right? Countries aren't so different. Families aren't so different. Friends, communities, institutions, faith traditions, none of them are actually so different from that. The ones worth staying in relationship with are the ones where, well, first, where actual harm isn't present, right? Where the potential is real, where the stated values are worth fighting for, even when the practice falls short, right? And where your presence and your voice actually matter to the outcome. There's a spectrum to how people are responding to this moment. At one end, blind nationalism, right? Loyalty that refuses to see clearly, that mistakes criticism for betrayal, right? At the other end, something equally dangerous. The conviction that the system is so irretrievably broken that tearing it down by any means necessary is justified. And somewhere in the middle, a lot of people have simply gone quiet, disengaged, hopeless, checked out. Healthy pride in a family, a community, a country lives in none of those places. None of it, right? Healthy pride is informed. It holds the full picture and says, yeah, this is worth it. Not because it's perfect, okay? Because I believe in what it's trying to be, and I'm willing to be part of making it closer to that. That, I would argue, is the healthiest place to stand. It also, not coincidentally, does something very specific for our nervous system. Having a sense of agency, believing that your presence matters, that your actions have impact, that you're not simply a passive recipient of whatever the systems do to you, right? Good or bad. This is one of the most powerful regulators of the threat response. Helplessness is dysregulating. Agency is stabilizing. So find a way to be in active, clear-eyed relationship with the things that are bigger than yourself, your community, your country, your shared human story. This isn't just philosophically meaningful, it's physiologically important. So let's make this practical because I never want to leave you with insight without a path forward. All right. If you're carrying disillusionment right now, in any of the areas that I've talked about today, here are some things that actually help. Okay. First, name it as grief. Disillusionment is loss. The thing you lost was a belief, a picture of the world, a future you imagined. This is a real loss and it deserves to be grieved, not pushed through or rationalized away. Naming it as grief gives your nervous system permission to process it rather than to just carry it. Okay. Next, get curious about that activation. All right. When you notice the anxiety, the irritability, the dread, instead of just trying to make it stop, get curious about it, right? What belief is being threatened right now? What do you think is true that feels uncertain? Or what did you think is true that got completely crushed by reality, right? This isn't rumination. It's the beginning of actually processing what's happening rather than just reacting to it. Next, find your sphere of agency. One of the most common responses to large-scale disillusionment is a sense of real total helplessness. The problems are so big, the system's so entrenched that nothing that I do matters. That feeling is understandable, and it's also, in most cases, not entirely accurate. Okay? Where do you actually have influence? Your family? Your neighborhood? Your workplace? Your vote? Your conversations? Your presence? Start there. And I think presence is really important here. Okay, and I'm going to encourage you to not remove yourself from conversations or relationships where there are disagreements, because your presence is really important there if you can stay regulated in that presence. Okay, so start there. Agency at the small scale is still agency, and it still regulates your nervous system. Okay, next, this one's really, really important. Okay, be intentional about your information diet. I think that this is the crux of a lot of what's happening here. This deserves its own episode, and we'll get there. But for now, chronic exposure to information that activates that threat response from the amygdala without giving you any avenue for agency is one of the most reliably dysregulating things that you can do for yourself. Okay? You don't have to be uninformed to be healthy, but you do have to be intentional. Next, find or tend to your larger belonging, whatever form that takes for you: a faith community, a civic organization, a neighborhood group, a cause, something that connects you to shared story and shared investment in something beyond yourself. Not to bypass the complexity, but to have a place to stand while you hold it. Okay? Really look for, tend to that larger belonging. Disillusionment is one of the most undernamed sources of pain that I see in my work. Okay. It hides behind anxiety diagnoses and relationship conflicts, including family ruptures, right? And a general sense of heaviness that people can't quite explain. And it makes sense that it would, because we don't have great cultural language for it. And because admitting that something that we believed in has failed can feel like a kind of defeat, right? It isn't. It's honesty. And honesty, however uncomfortable, is always the beginning of something better. As you move through this coming month, look at the 5 practices that I shared with you, that I talked about today, okay? Naming what you're actually feeling, finding where your presence makes a genuine difference, limiting exposure to information that activates without giving you a way to respond, tending to something within your reach, and staying curious, really staying curious about what might still be worth believing in. Choose one of those things that feels honest for you where you are right now, right? Not one that you think you should choose, one that actually fits, one that you can actually feel, right? Return to it when you feel the dysregulation creeping in. Let it be your anchor for this month, okay? This is what I would tell you in the session, and I hope it's useful here between sessions. If you're not already receiving my Wednesday wellness tips, that's where I explore topics like this one in smaller, more personal doses every week, each one with its own pause to carry into your week. If you're not already receiving those, send me a message through grapevineinnerwellness.com and I'll get you added. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. That's how we grow this community and get these conversations to people who need to hear them most. Thank you. See you next time on Between Sessions.